Okay, Dreamer, please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be checking out Eileene's Castle Rush. This is the beginner's team I'll be using. We have Chloe, we have Sera, we have Yeonhee, Ace, and Ariel. All these are very accessible units. Probably you may not be building your Sera, but she is very important for this particular Castle Rush especially because you need to have a buff duration reduction skill, otherwise you cannot remove Eileene's buffs and then you cannot do any damage. Again, I want to stress that Castle Rush is a mode where 3-man AoE units shine. Okay, Castle Rush bosses take less damage from single target and 5-man AoE skills. You're using Chloe here for shock immunity, so she is a must use for this particular Castle Rush. Ace is for defense down, Sera is for buff duration reduction as I mentioned, and you can actually use her skills to try to get rid of the front wave as fast as you can. Yeonhee here is for basic healing, okay? I know many people have gone beyond Yeonhee, okay? But this is really just a team to show the bare minimal you can put together for this particular Castle Rush. So because these units are not built at all, even in Korea server, we never saw the need to actually build these units for Castle Rush back then, because when Castle Rush came out, I think I already had, those units that are meant for Castle Rush. I already had Yeonhee, I already had Runthrough from the beginning. So that is why, when people were saying who is very important to pick in the beginning reroll, I actually said that Runthrough is the most important one because she will be so good in this mode and she's pretty much the one for this mode. Okay, so after you've killed out first two waves, it really begins. Usually Eileene will cast both her skills first, so you don't have to worry too much. You can use Ariel's bottom skill to cast defense down on the boss, and this will allow you to do more damage, so it stacks on top with Aces. Now because these units, again as I mentioned, are not very built, so this run is gonna end pretty fast, but not to worry, we'll go into the better teams later on. As you can see, Chancellor actually used a skill and then he casted a damage nullification on Eileene and all of them. So you definitely need a buff duration reduction for this. You cannot use a buff removal skill to remove this damage nullification buff. Also, if you do use Vanessa has a piercing skill, so piercing skills can go through this immunity without any issue. You don't have to worry about not being able to remove it. And the main thing to note is basically just that. Just keep in mind that whenever you see Chancellor using that particular skill and casting the nullification, you need to either remove it or use piercing skills to go through it. Some top players don't actually even bring a buff duration reduction unit. Okay, they just take the time. Instead, during that period of no damage, they actually take the time to heal, they take the time to buff up, and then once that 2-turn nullification goes away, they will then start attacking again. So that's also one possible option you may think about. But honestly, if you are just trying out this Castle Rush for the first few times, it will be much better if you just use the buff duration reduction unit. Most of my units are on block set because block is one of the strongest sets you can put on PvE support units. Miho is on the crit set and then Runthrough is on the damage dealt set with skills enhanced. I will usually cast will probably be Miho's skills. Try to kill off the front mobs, the rooks. You don't really want to use the magic vulnerability skill from Miho too early. You want to use it when you enter the Eileene phase of things so that it will benefit you more in terms of damage output. So now we begin. First you buff with Biscuit. That's always the go-to move with Biscuit. And upon entering, always buff with Biscuit. Then the next thing you want to do is to buff with Lina. And then straight away fire off with Runthrough. Because the next turn is actually going to be, the next skill is going to be the Javelin. The Javelin will cast the nullification. So if I didn't actually use Runthrough's skill back then, and I actually went on to debuff with Miho's bottom skill, then I will lose an entire period of the buff from Lina, and that's not what you want. You want to use Rory's skill as close as possible to Lena's buff upon being used. So yes, this boss is a little bit more tricky and may require you to think on your feet as it happens, because there's a lot of turn counts involved that you need to keep in mind, especially since the buff from Javelin is not something that's coming from Eileene herself, so you need to keep that in mind always. You may think that, oh, Rook is not doing anything, but actually he is the one doing everything. So I enhanced my skill with Biscuit again. As you can see here, Rook is going to use Javelin again, so always queue for Miho's skills. Save Miho's top skill for this purpose. Okay, don't use her top skill recklessly. And then after that, you can actually continue to use Miho's bottom skill, buff with Lena, and then finish off and then fire off the 2 Ruri attacks. So this should be your game plan for this particular boss. In the event that your Miho is still on cooldown, then yes, you can actually do some healing. You can actually use Chloe's top skill to increase your attack percentage. Miho is a little fragile, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so she died really early. Also, I also want to stress that Eileene's Castle Rush is definitely on the harder side of things. Okay, compared to the other Castle Rush, usually I don't score that much for Eileene because she is just so strong. So as you can see here, now with the immunity that Eileene has, you cannot really do anything to her if your Miho is down and if your units are also not having any damage skills or buff duration reduction skills. So this is basically all that you can settle with. This time with Yeonhee instead, as I mentioned before, Yeonhee could be a better option compared to Miho, especially if your Miho is not a capable damage dealer yet. Because if you do remember, her T6 effect is that she deals extra damage whenever she does a weakness hit. This pairs in very well with a T6 Biscuit, and unfortunately in this account there's neither. so unless you really wheel out units for this purpose, then sure, you can actually use Miho as a secondary damage dealer instead. But here, Yeonhee being a magic attack buffer helps Ruri so much that you can potentially score better as well. But take note here, you do not have a buff duration reducer on this particular team because you no longer have Miho. Yeonhee doesn't do buff duration reduction. So this team is actually the perfect situation in terms of explaining to you what you can do when an immunity is up, because there's really nothing much you can do. You can only throw skills randomly, heal and buff attack, and then wait for the immunity to go before you continue your attack. And remember I mentioned top players, they actually used this team before Miho came out. So usually during this period, they will just be buffing. But the thing is, once the immunity goes down, they are able to dish out such big damage that it really doesn't matter if they just lost out on a few turns due to the immunity. So cycle again once Biscuit's buff is available, use it again. As you can see, Lena's buff is also going to be available very soon, but due to the Javelin, don't use Lena's buff first because Lena's buff only lasts for 3 turns. I know the same also applies to Chloe's buff, so I would say that Lena's buff is still more important. But once you have set this up, there's one more turn left on the immunity. Hopefully it goes down before Yeonhee dies, and once that happens, you can fire off with Ruri skills already. Yeonhee is also one of the more fragile units on this team, so if your Yeonhee doesn't have great gear, she may die really early and you will lose out on a lot of damage output. Take note that this Yeonhee has a revive ring, okay? It's not that Yeonhee actually can revive. Yeah, so once, again we enter the last 10 turns, turn 60 to 70, things get very intense, and yeah, you basically just have to use whatever skills you have to get as much score as you can. So that's all for this video. I hope it helped, and if it did, do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more Castle Rush videos this week. Thank you so much and see you!